the last time that we talked, Julia had a lot of promise. It didn't have a lot of investment, but we're starting to see investment in the conference and the investment in Julia Computing. Can you talk about your role in Julia Computing and what you're trying to do there?
Yeah, so we all of us, the four of us who created the Julia language, Jeff Bezant and Stefan, Alan Edelman, myself, we were the four people who also started Julia Computing, and it was very early. It was soon after. It might have even existed on paper when we met for the first time in Bangalore, but really speaking, the company sort of came alive in 2015. We took on two other co-founders, Deepak Vinci, who's actually still out of Bangalore, and Ken Fisher, who had just finished high school and was entering Harvard University back then. It is very difficult to build a robust, high-quality compiler in an academic environment. So MIT was the right place for us to design the language and build out the very early community. But in order to take it to its full potential, and I think we're barely scratching that potential right now, we had to sort of step outside, work with commercial customers, set up a company, see the problems that people wanted to solve in real life. And that's how we sort of ended up forming the company, and I ended up taking the role as CEO. Like you mentioned, we raised our first round of investment back then, 2016, but we're not an investment fueled company like many companies in the in the Bay Area are. And we sort of were very clear what our goal is. Our goal is we're setting up this company for making Julia the best language we can imagine it to be, and we do not wish to be part of any rat race. And we've been very conservative with our use of capital and the way we've grown the business. So I think another very interesting thing along those lines is, you mentioned JuliaCon. I mean, the fact that it ended up being online this year, like there were 26,000 visitors to JuliaCon in that period. It's insane. It's mind-boggling numbers. And we're now seeing startups that are, possible only because of Julia, right? Like without Julia, they would have had to have 10x the amount of spend on engineering, and the idea would not be viable. So there are now entire new companies that are being formed only because of Julia, and many people from the Julia community, they come together and they take these things forward. For example, Pumas.ai, they're one of our deep collaborators. That's a complete pharma specific set of tools, and that company is just focused on pharma. There's Beacon.bio, which Jared Revels started, one of the early collaborators at Julia Lab. And they're focusing only on the problem of EKG signals in the brain. I mean, and even building hardware to go with it. There's Relational.ai, which is combining modern machine learning techniques with relational databases. Again, completely done in Julia all the way by a person who's already a very famous entrepreneur. So it's just amazing to see so many of these things happen. And all of it is investment. Like all of us collaborate with each other, right? We are not out there competing with each other. We know that we have a common, set of tools, a common set of infrastructure, and we all support each other. And it's really more than just business. I mean, which is what makes it so much fun.
There's something about the idea of working together that makes open source feel like hope, right? In the midst of this pandemic and these political times, but the idea that we can kind of bind together.
I think that's a very, very important point you make. I mean, and that's what I've loved about the open source community. And, I'm also not heretic about open source. I mean, I realize that there's things that have to be proprietary, and, we're involved in proprietary things. We file patents when they make sense, and we open source a bunch of stuff that makes sense, right? And everything has its own place in the world. But the thing that's most amazing about the open source community is how it brings people together. I mean, across countries, across so many different backgrounds. I mean, I was in Bangalore when I started all my work on Julia. Now I'm sort of, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And there's so much more that we have in common. And it's just so horrible to see all the things that are happening in the world around us. And I think you said it right, that open source gives us hope. I mean, it teaches us to work together, to live together, to share a common goal, to share a common ideal. I mean, I wish we could take these messages to more people.
Right. But it's interesting, as I was kind of getting back into Julia, as I started, so first I started looking at, what's happening with in the conference scene, and then up pops JuliaCon, right? And then I started looking at what was happening in terms of language, and then I saw, 4,000 plus new packages in the last couple of years, 1.0, and then I started looking who's using Julia, and I saw, Disney and Apple and Facebook and Ford, and it's really cool to see the good guys win, Viral. I mean, the whole team. It's exciting to see.
That's very kind of you to say so.
What's next for Julia? What are the frontiers?
I think the original goal and vision still stands, right? Like the reason why we built Julia was to solve the hardest challenges and problems that we imagined, right? And I'm personally a strong believer in science being the answer to solving the challenges that we face. And when I mean science, I mean broadly scientific methods, right? And computation is such a key ingredient of science, of the scientific method, right? When you combine it with theory and experiment, sort of those are the two old pillars. This is the third pillar, really, computation. And there is so much more to be done, right? Whether you look at the traditional computational sciences, whether you look at machine learning, and it's just barely beginning to sort of do the kinds of things that were unimaginable 10 years ago. If you look at sort of the challenges that face us today, right? Like in the broader world, I mean, we're trying to decarbonize our electricity grids. We're trying to sort of suck the CO2 out of the atmosphere, resolve climate change, fight a pandemic. I mean, every problem that we face and have faced as humanity, the answer has always been scientific. And I see like our mission as being, providing those tools to scientists and engineers around the world, so that they are no longer limited by computation.
And what's fun to see is that you have these tiny abstractions at the bottom. First, you start with the idea that you're built from the ground up with performance. So that doesn't get in the way, slide that aside. Then you start to stack abstractions on top of each other, like the macro system, so that you can build in yourself, like the multi-dispatch, so that you get more reuse, even in places you don't expect it. Then you kind of start to add all those tiny enablers into the mathematical community, so that you can use all the Unicode symbols, and then you start to unleash the power of the community by good policy, because that's what you're doing with Julia Computing. Has people working together and not batting up against itself. It's so good to see the nice guys succeed and win. Thank you for spending this time with me.
Thanks, Bruce.